but I will be watching you. I'm also, given that it's late in the day, not going to talk much about monitor, although we are very innovative, obviously. But I'm going to talk about some of the ideas that we've come across that we find really innovative and interesting. And I'll talk a little bit about how we came across those ideas, but I really want to focus on some of the innovations we've seen that are interesting and trying to get your reactions about those things. Monitoring Inclusive Markets focuses on market-based solutions for poverty, market-based solutions for social change. As we've seen, there's lots and lots of different ways of defining that. I'm going to take one definition just so you know what I'm talking about. I don't think it's the only definition. I don't think it's the definition of a vehicle that will solve all social problems in the world by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's one that we've taken for a reason. First of all, we're looking at institutions that are commercially viable, at least in concept, or looking to become commercially viable. That just means revenues are covering costs and preferably sort of paying off capital costs over time in industries that need them. We're also looking at enterprises that benefit the B60, we call it, the bottom 60% of the income pyramid, right? Again, you could choose 70, you could choose 50. For argument's sake, we've chosen the B60. Having some social impact means either improving the quality of life or the quality of the livelihoods of those people. Again, a very broad definition, and we didn't get down to the metric stage. I think that's a valuable thing to do, is to define further, but we looked at things like, are you improving the quality of healthcare, the quality of education? Are you improving incomes? Are you improving the sustainability and reliability of incomes, and so on? And lastly, we wanted to look at things that are at scale, right? Or at minimum scalable. So our ideal market-based solution, MBS I'm going to call them from now on, is basically something that meets all of these three criteria. And what you find is that NGOs may benefit the B60, some of them may be at scale. Small social enterprises will be commercially viable and benefit the poor. And large commercial enterprises are in the top left. What do I mean? What sorts of initiatives am I talking about? We've talked about some of them already today, but things like very, very low-cost maternity hospitals. Rockefeller knows all about those. They've invested in those in India. Private schools that have reduced significantly the cost of education while maintaining a high quality or improving quality in India. Community water filtration systems that provide 10 liters of water for about ₹1 a day. Again, we've talked about those. And agricultural supply chains, innovations such as alternative sales platforms or contract production systems even that have actually managed to improve farmer value. These are just some examples to give a flavor. This isn't a new field, by the way. Ted London's colleague, C.K. Prahlad, wrote about this a long time ago. The IFC and WRI, among others, have actually developed that. But yet there are still a lot of unanswered questions, right? Primarily for us, the two most interesting questions were, you have market-based solutions, you have microfinance, as I mentioned earlier, you have dairy cooperatives, you have things like ITC eChopal, which is a ICT-based agri-network. Yet, there aren't many at scale, really. When you think about the amount of innovation that's going on, the number of people thinking about innovation, not only of products and services, but of business models, there aren't actually that many which are at scale. So why is that the case? This is one of the fundamental questions that we sought to answer. And secondly, the ones that are show promise of getting to scale. What are the business models they're using? So we're going beyond just products and services, but looking at the whole business model end to end. What we did was actually do a year and a half long study to try and answer these questions. And it was based in India, but then we did some global research at the end. We covered about 400 market-based solutions and initiatives that were seeking to be market-based. We then went into great detail in about 7 or 8 of them, and then basically developed, I'm just going to hold this up, developed analysis that's in this report, which I can hand out to a few of you, but basically looks at business models in detail and tries to understand what will actually trigger their scaling and how they're actually getting around traditional barriers that are faced by social enterprises. We didn't actually look at things by sector, by the way. That was not our approach. We did look across many different sectors, but we were agnostic to, in a sense, whether the business model is in one or many of these sectors. And I'll expand on what I mean by that. So, for example, I should just go back. We came up with a number of different business models, about 7 or 8, that we thought were actually innovative and scalable, right? And all of these in some way addressed a barrier or a set of constraints or variables, I should be calling them now, that was faced by either the B60 as customers or the B60 as suppliers engaging in value chains and things like agriculture and crafts production and so on. And each of these, you may or may not have seen them before. They may not be innovative in the sense that they're brand new, but they are in some way specifically tailored towards doing business with the B60, right? And what we realize is that a lot of these models are actually fundamentally different from conventional top-of-the-pyramid private sector business models. So, for example, on the B60 supplier side, you have something called direct deep procurement. Now, what happens is that if you look at low-income farmers, they're typically very, very small plots. They're scattered. They have very low capacity to deal with risk. They have very low capacity to deal with upfront investment. What that means is it's very, very expensive if you're a procurement agency buying, let's say, wheat or fruit and vegetables or so on, to actually procure from these farmers. Your transaction costs, among other things, are just really, really high. Your quality, measuring quality is very, very difficult. Or cost you a lot more than it would if you're buying from a large farmer. So what businesses do in general is just buy from big farmers. There's an organization called SERP, however, which is actually a government organization, but it's sort of spun off into its own entity now, which places very, very low-fi procurement centers all around the state of Andhra Pradesh in southern India, every 4 to 6 kilometers, amazingly, to procure from farmers. Now, what happens in usual aggregate value chains is that you have about 30 to 45% wastage and cost of intermediaries. So everything from the wholesaler, which could be considered a valid cost, to just spoilage because they're dragging their produce 20 or 25 kilometers on average to your local built-up market. So what SERP have done is by placing the procurement centers closer to the farmer, they reduce wastage. They save on the intermediary costs, such as agents and rental costs in the bigger cities where these transactions usually take place. And they also transfer that capability of large-scale transport and conservation and cold chains to someone that can handle it. The farmer doesn't have to do it anymore. It now goes on to the organization to do it. And they can handle credit, they can invest in systems, and so on. And what this means is it actually saves both parties a lot of money. Farmers save, on average, 10 to 15% of their transaction costs, and that translates directly into income. And SERP also managed to much more profitably deliver services because they're able to take part of the cut of the wastage that's being saved or the transaction costs in terms of transport that are being saved. That's one example. I'll take you through another example, which is pay-per-use community water filtration. So another classic constraint or variable associated with the B60 is that they're unable to actually make investments, long-term investments in their own healthcare, in their own education, and so on. And what we see is with a lot of consumer durable products, things like solar lanterns, irrigation pumps, and in this case, water filters, as Maria pointed out, there are lots of great water filters around. Sure, you can reduce the cost of them, and invariably over time, costs will halve and quarter and so on. But yet, people still don't buy them. Why is that? Well, $40, which is what it costs for, let's say, Unilever's Pureit water filter in India, is a lot of money for the typical B60 consumer. In fact, it's about 1 month's income for a rural B60 consumer. So that's a hell of a lot to invest in something when you don't truly understand or value the actual benefit of that product. However, there's two things you can do, basically, to solve that problem. One is you can provide credit, so they can buy the water filter. You can link up with a microfinance institute and actually provide credit. And that's something that's happening a lot at the moment. No one's really taken that model to scale, but it does have some legs, right? The other option is you can actually deliver the service very, very differently. And this is an example of something that would only happen for the B60. The T40, if you like, wouldn't be interested in this concept. But it's the concept of having a water filtration plant at a community level. Right? So what you do is you do something at scale, for 400 or 500 households rather than just one household. So it vastly reduced the cost. You're able to ensure that the customer or the villager doesn't actually need to put in any upfront cost. They can just turn up with their jerry can, pay 2 rupees, which is extremely low cost for 10, 12, 20 liters of water, depending on which institution you look at. There are multiple institutions doing this. And they don't need to risk and invest $40 up front to see, is this going to work, is this not going to work? Thirdly, there's a massive increase in compliance. A lot of these health products, for example, you need to make sure that people are using them correctly over time. That's very, very difficult in scattered households. Again, adds to your cost structure. If you can actually just pay someone who's trained to do it at a village level, it's efficient and it gets done properly. So there's a number of institutions doing this. Nandi, who Jim mentioned, there's Bairaji Foundation, there's the Pyramidal Foundation, there's WHI, which Acumen invest in, EPGL, and so on. In fact, there are about 1,000 of these plants now all around India, serving about 2 million to 3 million people, right? And each plant requires about 500 people to break even, so 500 households to break even. So they don't need to go into big villages to make the economics of this work. I'm also going to talk about Gyanshala. If you could play the video. Gyanshala is a network of one-room schools in Ahmedabad, which is in Western India. And basically, what they do is to take the magic out of teaching, right? Which may sound a little harsh, but think about teaching. It's a really, really tough job, right? It's really hard to communicate learning effectively, to facilitate learning. One solution to that problem, again, it's very hard to do this at a B60 level. One solution to that problem is just getting really, really good people to do it, right? A lot of Western economies have taken that approach, and Teach for America, Teach First, and so on. It's a great approach if you can afford it. Pay people or encourage good people to do that work. Another thing is just to make the job easier, which is what Gyanshala have done. So basically what they've done is to develop a really sophisticated back-end system, which is essentially a series of teaching aids, worksheets, lesson plans, and so on. So the teacher no longer has to plan the lesson, do all the admin, order all the textbooks, manage the kind of day-to-day stuff of the class. All the teacher does is teach. And they're assisted, very, very heavily assisted in doing that, both through materials and through a very, very sort of regimented schedule. Regimented in the sense that your time is planned. It does actually include time to spend with individual children, right? So the teachers are assisted in teaching, and also they're supervised. So once a week, for one session, one morning or one afternoon, a supervisor will come in, a Gyanshala supervisor, and actually spend time in a classroom and make sure that the kids are learning in the right way. And that's also a great feedback mechanism, because they'll see what's working, what's not working, feed it back up to that. Because the danger is that high-end system is maybe obsolete or irrelevant, but you need to have that feedback loop, right? So what this means is that you can pay your teachers remarkably little, right? Now, this may or may not be a good thing in the big scheme of things, in terms of when you think about livelihoods and so on. But if your goal is to actually teach at the lowest cost possible and the highest quality possible, they've got a great method, right? Which is they pay their teachers between 800 and 1,000 rupees a month, which is basically $20 a month, which is substantially left. It's about a third of what government school teachers get paid, right? But the MIT Poverty Lab have done studies on this, and their outcomes in the local area are about twice as high as the best government schools in the area. Fair enough, there might be some self-selection and so on. It's not a rigorous academic study, but it does just indicate that we've done our own studies, and a lot of these kids are actually coming from government schools. So it's roughly the same proportion of people. They're not paying for the full cost of the education, which is about $3 a month. They're only paying about a third of that. The rest is subsidized. Do we have that video? This is just a quick of the Gyanshala classroom, just to give you an idea. It's only one room. Another way they reduce costs is not by buying any school infrastructure. They just rent rooms in slums. So in any given community that they're operating in, grade 1 will be, on the left as you go in, grade 2 will be ran by the cowshed, and grade 3 will be somewhere else. In someone's house, they could rent a room. Really, really reduces the cost. Basically, they've reduced the whole concept of learning down to the bare essentials, and then done those extremely well. Another thing they have is very, very strong links to the community. The supervisors basically go out, recruit absent kids, and so on. Let me actually switch back to the... So, I'm going to actually finish up here, but those are just 2 or 3 out of the 400 initiatives that we studied. We're working with some of them in more depth now to basically figure out how they can scale up. You'll have to believe me on these top-line findings or read the report to get you to the data, but basically what we found is, first of all, the market-based solution business models must be customized to actually reach the poor, right? There are very, very few, if you look at product categories, there are very, very few products which have gone down to the poor that hadn't had customized business models to get there. Even if you look at mobile phone segments in India, they've gone up massively in terms of the growth, but it was prepaid, 10 rupee prepaid cards that actually triggered that, right? Very simple innovation, but you need customized business models. Secondly, it takes time to get to scale, right? Partly because it's difficult, partly because some of these problems of distribution and marketing and the indirect benefits to customers which are not clear, it takes time to solve those problems. They haven't been widely addressed right now. This is not incremental innovation. Microfinance, a massive success story. It took 30 years, right, to get there. And for the first 20 or so, it wasn't really that sustainable, right? Or not publicly sustainable anyway. That's the point on soft funding. You have to have, I guess, as Chris was saying, a clear line to sustainability and exit. But we did find that a lot of these, even the successful MBSs, did actually have soft funding at the beginning. Also, scale is achieved in different ways. So it's not just one organization that can get to scale. Take the community water filtration example. That's a cluster of companies. Some have 400, some have 50. Competition creates innovation. Again, microfinance. Some of the best microfinance, or the most profitable, I should say, microfinance institutions in India have reduced their center time meetings to about 12 minutes, which is about half what the Grameen Bank have. That means they can do twice as many center meetings and half the cost of their operations, their operational costs. So clusters are a way to go forward. On the other hand, there are some institutions like Amul, which have scaled, or ITCs, each which have scaled within one institution. And lastly, as I mentioned before, corporates seem to be a lot less active in this space than social enterprises. And we've heard various reasons why that may happen. One is definitely that, especially in India, there's actually a very creamy middle-class layer which is growing fantastically, which is the consumer class, which can afford conventional products and services. Secondly, is the corporate innovation may not be geared towards this segment. The complete rethink, the going against the culture of the organizations, the local talent and local knowledge may not be as effective, even in domestic corporates. That's me. By the way, I've got a few copies of the report, so if you'd like to see it. And we're also doing similar work in Africa, so if you'd like to talk about that, I can do that.
Thank you, Nishant.